Welcome to the National Council of Churches' fourth Chaos or Community Faith and Fire conversation on this day, Wednesday, the December 9th at 1 o'clock. We thank you for joining us. Today's conversation will be on the World House, mutual inclusion for beloved community. And we are blessed to have with us Dr. Dennis Edwards, Reverend Dr. Dennis Edwards he's a New Testament professor at North Park Seminary and also author of Might from the Margins. And we also have Christian Brooks, a representative for domestic issues from the Presbyterian Church U.S.A.'s Office of Public Witness. And thirdly, we have Reverend Noel Anderson. He is a United Church of Christ elder. I believe that's the correct designation, as well as a grassroots organizer for the Church World Service here in Washington, D.C. And lastly, but definitely not least, we have Sara Benitez. She's the Vice President of Organizing and Campaign for Faith in Public Life. We're blessed to have them, and we're looking forward to a awesome conversation. But first, as a good Methodist that I am, as a good United Methodist as I am, let us pray. Most heavenly and righteous God, we give you thanks and praise for another day not promised. We give you praise for allowing us to come together for these kinds of courageous conversations, moving us from chaos into community as a people of faith and as a world that you have ordained on earth as it is in heaven. God, give us the courage to endure and the conviction to fight for what's right. Breathe fresh on us so that we may be edifications of your glory. Touch us all in a mighty way. Only you know how to do that best. And we will give you the praise and glory from hence now and evermore. These things we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Now, to go ahead and get things started, I just want to ask the panelists insight into their opening remarks on the divisions across the country. Where are we right now? How do you see things being exacerbated by racism and the divisive policies and Trumpism, as it's been termed, the misinformation campaigns, all while understanding there's nothing new under the sun. So, if you will, popcorn style, let's get to it.
You know, I want to be able to hear from everyone else, but because I'm old, I figured I would just go ahead and go first. Oh my goodness. I think the thing that really is stressing me is how much people who proclaim faith, and I come up in an era where it was about trying to either defend the faith or explain it in such a way that a non-believer would understand, right? So there was a lot of emphasis on trying to make a case for why people should believe in Jesus or something. And now I think the thing that's bugging me so much is how those same people, in many cases, or at least that part of the Christian community, is so committed to things that aren't true or to denying reality and to exacerbating race problems. So I guess what I'm saying is the problems have always been there. I guess I'm just freaked out by how much Christians or people allegedly calling themselves Christians are buying into that kind of stuff. I think that's what irks me.
Definitely so. Anyone else?
Yeah, you know, I would really echo that in saying that it's very frustrating to hear how Christians are buying into the divisiveness. But it's also important to understand that, you know, Trump didn't cause these issues, as we all know. He just exploited them, right? He just exploited the fractures that were already here. You know, our country was really founded upon division. We were founded upon this us versus them mentality, this idea that if they have, then that means we don't. So we have to take from them. And this legacy of oppression, this legacy of taking wealth, taking resources has been passed down from generation to generation. And I guess I have really been wondering, what does unity actually look like in America? Because if we really think about the founding of this country, America does not know unity. So like, what does it look like? And I feel like we are in a point in our society where it is extremely important to start wrestling with what does unity actually look like, and how do we get there?
Yeah, I think that's really profound, both Dr. Edwards and Christian, what you both said, because I think I've been meditating on that a lot this year and reflecting, and in the recent years, right? Of we know Trump didn't cause this to happen. We know not only is our history one of oppression and colonization, but through violence, extreme violence, right? Of genocide, of Native people, of enslavement and forced migration across continents over and over again. And so I do think, to me, that's the question too of, and that unfortunately as Christians, I think it's important we acknowledge our faith's role in those, in colonization and in that destruction and violence. And that part of what I see the challenge now in our country is, one, what is unity, and what is a decolonized Christianity, and what is our calling as Christians to go beyond and create something new with our faith and build in a way that acknowledges the harm caused in the past, and that for some of us individually, I know for myself, has been very liberating and empowering in my life as a person of color. But I also, that history is still there too, and is still in a lot of the infrastructures and institutions of churches as well. And so while it's hard to understand how some Christians buy into divisiveness, there's also research, and I'm sure you've all seen writing too, about how the Christian church in America, especially the white Christian church, has actually enforced and created the very way that divisiveness continues, and that racism and white supremacy continues to be lifted up. And I think that's, to me, one of the challenges, the things that I wrestle with in this time as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of the similar thoughts. My area being immigration and refugee issues. Of course, this administration has slashed the refugee program by 80%, passed over 400 policies against all immigrants, really trying to limit legal immigration. But what we know about this is this president has been trying to create this exclusion rather than exclusion, this hateful vehemence rather than compassion or empathy. And it's not a secret, I don't think, to anybody on this call, that embedded in this is a deep-seated history of racism and colonialism, which was just named by the other speakers here today. And majority of immigrants, as we know, coming to the U.S. today are people of color. But these chants of build that wall, well, they're based in that history of colonialism and white supremacy, and really build a sense of nationalism about defending a border. But that's really also based in some sort of sense of racial identity found in that same ideology of white supremacy. And so as we look at our own faith, and as we mentioned, it's been used, Christianity has been used for racist agendas, for colonial agendas. And we have to really look at what kind of Christianity do we want to live out? Are we going to base our faith in liberation for all people, or is it going to be used as a justification to harm others for one's own benefit? And that goes back to, are we calling for a theology of scarcity, which this president has been calling for, or one in which we actually believe there is enough for all, that we have faith in God, that there is enough for all? And faith did have a really important role in this election. And I was glad to see that on the progressive side, we finally started to embrace our values and our morals using robust faith language. I mean, just as Obama ran on hope, Biden running on unity and healing America, well, that's obviously easier said than it is done. But those same values are being embraced in terms of not just inclusion as a whole, but really looking at how do people of color come together from different cultures, from different sectors, How do LGBTQ people come together? And many of us have been calling for this administration to continue to lead in their cabinets with more and more diversity. And I think what we find ourselves in is a space of hope. Can we actually start to live out some of these values, some of this faith that we have put forth? And I think that as progressive Christians, we need to lean into that more, and we can't cede that political space in the same way that we have been complacent a little bit to say, well, no politics in the pulpit. Well, that's comfortable. That's comfortable for all of us. But when we really look at Jesus's ministry, what did he do when it came to flipping tables for which what I saw as a direct action? He was ready and wasn't worried about the consequences at the time. So I believe that we have to lean into that political space with a progressive faith, really calling out, what do we want this new administration to do?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Sara, did you want to chime in? Did you want to reply to that?
Oh, just, yeah, to echo what Noel is saying, absolutely. There is, this is a time of transition in many ways, in that it is I do feel hopeful, and it's a time of hope that as we have a transition in who is our president and who gets the loudest platform, so to speak, in our country, that the voices that are, very few and a very loud minority in this country who do create this sort of story that is real, is there, but really exaggerate the divisiveness, the hatred, and sow those seeds with misinformation. My hope is that will decrease as, President Trump is no longer president and no longer has that large platform, and that we do have a role to focus on what is it that we're calling not just this new administration, but Congress and in our communities to bring forward, and how we come together for those of us who are in this space of wanting to build unity and care for our communities.
Thank you so much for everybody's awesome comments here. And I just want to say that, in our journey to building unity, or our journey to from chaos to community, and I think I heard this a little bit before, is that we have to be willing to sit in the discomfort. And I think that a part of what has been going on within our society is that white supremacy dictates that we move directly out of discomfort into being happy all the time. And that's not reality. That is not reality for me as a Black woman. That is not reality for anyone who is a person of color. So we have to push back against the white supremacy understanding of how to deal with issues, and really be willing to sit in the discomfort and honestly sit in the chaos and really work through, really challenge ourselves, really challenge our understanding, our ideas, our ideology, our theology, so that we can come to a place where we can truly be unified, where we can truly have reconciliation. Because just, jumping from disunity to unity without any real work, we're not going to see any real progress, and that's just going to crumble.
Christian, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's been said many times that peace, what is peace? Peace isn't the absence of chaos, or the absence of tension. It's the presence of justice. So like when we move into justice for ourselves, when we do justice for ourselves, and trying to tune the world out, but tune into our faith and really recognize what we're dealing with, essentially. And then assess that with our good minds, as God gave us. God didn't give us a spirit of fear, but gave us sound mind, love, and joy, right? So like when we do that work internally or for ourselves, we're able to, attack the chaos that comes around us, right? Is that the direction that we should be going spiritually? while advocating for justice, Dr. Edwards?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on that one. I'm old enough to remember when it was a slogan of the teens around me to say, Black is beautiful. I remember James Brown giving us an anthem, "Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud." And we needed it. We needed an affirmation. We needed to know that we were valuable. And so when I hear younger folks say Black Lives Matter, I'm like, that's to me in the same vein. It's sad to me that it has to be said, but it's in the same vein. It's in the same vein of an affirmation, right? And then to get pushback from that says to me that there's a fear that you just mentioned, Minister Christian, that we should not be having. But I see that there's a fear on the part of white supremacists that if they can affirm the humanity of someone else, like Sister Christian was saying earlier, somehow they take that as lessening their own humanity. But I think what it's really saying is that they know they're losing power. So I think that we have cast, or they have cast, this quest of following Jesus in terms of gaining some kind of power. And when that happens, then you've got to have winners and losers. And so for them to win, they've got to make us losers. But I think part of our path is to say, to restore their dignity. We're made in the image of God. We're loved by God. And to join in solidarity with each other to say, anybody who's in those marginal spaces, we also are made in the image of God. We need to love each other. And love is radical. I could say more about that another time. But my point is, it's right for us to affirm ourselves, who we are as part of this work of justice, so that we're not always feeling put upon and beat down. I want us to affirm ourselves and our sisters and brothers who are in these marginal spaces.
That goes directly into what Reverend Noel was saying earlier about the theology of scarcity. Like, we've been duped into thinking that there isn't enough for everybody. So the ones in power have to stay in power in order to maintain the resources and influence, so that other folks won't trample on them. I was looking at something earlier today or yesterday, and it talked about, how there's a predominant fear of the dominant culture of retribution for decades and for centuries of white violence. I'll go ahead and name it. Since we're naming white elephants in the nation right now, let's go ahead and name that. There is that fear, that underlying fear of retribution for that white violence for decades. And it's unfounded, right? Because I also heard somewhere else, people should be lucky that Black folks, I'll go ahead and say it since I am a Black man, that Black folks don't want retribution. We just want equity. We want what's ours. We want to be valued. Reverend Noel, I saw you unmute, so let's hear what you got to say.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, I can't agree more with everything that has been said. And I do think these, it is very scary for us to see how Trumpism is certainly not dead. We see that from the outcome of the elections, that so many people, in fact, did vote for Trump. And by virtue, I mean, it's hard to tell what all they're voting for, but we can certainly ascertain that they don't see an issue with the discriminatory language he uses. And so, what does that say about a large portion of this country? And from the exit polls too, right? We know that many of those people were in fact white people. And I think that there's a lot of work that we need to do. And as Christian mentioned, rightfully, these conversations are uncomfortable, and that we do need to make people uncomfortable. And I think a lot of this theology of scarcity is based in a lot of the fundamental theological teachings that I would say are just wrong, in terms of the emphasis, for example, on the individual salvation versus the reality that we need to be collectively saved, and that in fact my liberation as a white person is never fully there. It's actually tied up with the liberation of all of my siblings, especially those who are marginalized. And so I think that there's a lot of work to do to try to teach, and it's very frustrating sometimes, even when you go into a progressive white congregation, and they can still frustrate us in terms of some of the language or some of the way they want to bring in, we want to bring in minorities as long as they act like us. But that's not the reality, and that's not what it really looks like to come together. And so this question that there's been some critique, right, of Biden's unity, speaking about unity, and I think that makes sense, that we have to really look at, well, what does unity look like? What does equity look like? And that's what you just said, Christian, that we can't just be talking about equality or that somehow we all started on the same playing field, because we know that's just not correct. And that if we really want to talk about what's equitable, then we have to deal with this history of racism and injustice in a way that we can bring more people in and have those real discussions and education, and hopefully try to push back against these years of division.
Come on and help somebody. If God so loved the world, for God so loved the world, not just an individual community or people. God so loved the world that he sent his only son to cause some trouble and flip some tables and to save some folks in the process. So I'm grateful for that sacrifice and grateful for that perfect example of what we should be in the community, calling on the systems to reform themselves and being a thorn in the system's presence, and also caring about folks and calling truth to power and calling people by their right name and calling them into healing, into their own healing, and calling us together. I do appreciate you all's sentiments on that. But this house that we're sitting in, this house that we're living in, this world house, even in the most unified houses, there's no assimilation. There's always individuals that are working together, right? So the next question that I have, or the next prompt that I have, is from chapter 6, is where we got the title for this conversation. It's chapter 6 of Martin Luther King's books, From Chaos to Community, Where Do We Go From Here? And it's titled The World House. Martin Luther King says, it starts that chapter with, some years ago, a famous novelist died. Among his papers were found a list of several plots and future stories, the most prominent underscored being this one. A widely separated family inherits a house in which they have to live together. This is the great new problem of mankind. A family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interests, who, because we can never again live apart, must learn somehow to live with each other in peace. Since Christian Brooks raised the question, I want to toss it back to her. How do we accomplish this unity? How do we accomplish this task of living together in peace?
Yeah, this is a great question. I'm glad you gave us the questions beforehand, because this is one of the hardest questions that I was thinking about. And I think that what we have really been talking about is we have to understand, what does peace actually mean, right? Because in our current understanding of peace, most of the country sees peace through the lenses of white supremacy. Like, a quick research of the definition of peace is a state of tranquility or quiet, such as freedom from civil disturbance, a state of security or order within a community provided by law or custom. That's not peace. That is just another way to keep the oppressed in line. And we saw that. We saw that from the rhetoric that was used around the BLM protests this summer. So, what are we considering peace to mean? And who is that peace for? Because so far, peace for white folks has meant suffering and chaos for people who look like me. So, honestly, in thinking about this question and wrestling with the answer to this question, I came up with a bunch of questions myself. And this is, what do I think peace is? And this is something that I have honestly really been wrestling with since this year began. What is peace to me? And do I want it? Because if peace means that I'm just sitting back and suffering in silence in order to not disturb somebody else's bliss or happiness, then I don't want peace.
Come on.
Yeah, well, amen. I'm going to jump in there. Amen. Thank you, Sister Christian. Biblically speaking, right? Shalom, peace, is a wholeness. It's not, as you guys were already saying, it's not about an absence of conflict. It's not as if we're never going to have a disagreement, but there's a sense that even even the creation was for human flourishing. It was so that God could be could see creation be enjoyed, and when we thwart flourishing, or when humanity thwarts flourishing, shame on humanity, and we see that throughout Scripture, thwarting the flourishing of the natural creation and thwarting the flourishing of humans. So peace has got to be that way, but you've touched on it. It's not a zero-sum game, and I think that's what frightens people. That if we are working for liberation, if we think that people should flourish, it somehow means that something's going to be taken away from them. That's America. Maybe it's a human thing, but it's particularly acute in America, is that we feel like there is a limited piece of God's pie, and you have to get as much of it as you can. So I think theology's messed up. I wanted to just say that real quick. Since I teach biblical studies, I wanted to just say an amen to what Reverend Noel said, that there's this, that I've seen an emphasis in bygone times, and I'm seeing it now in the Southern Baptists, not to pick on denominations, but they are so adamantly opposed to, say, critical race theory and trying to think about the way humanity works and how power works, that there's still this emphasis that it's all about my individual likes, dislikes, who I might hate, or what I'm doing wrong in my own individual sin, and maybe get myself to heaven, and forgetting this bigger picture of human flourishing that God has been doing since the beginning. So I wanted to co-sign on that. I think that's a biblical point to be made.
And I think, like, just building on what Christian and Dr. Edwards said, it also raised a lot more questions for me, and just the reality of the time that we're in, that with climate change, there is even more the need that we share this house we are on together and care for God's creation, for our future, and for future generations. And it does make me wonder, what is it though that is driving, what is it that folks who are so focused on that individual salvation piece think, like, why are they driven in that for themselves, right? I mean, I think of it as, I do that self-work to be change in the world myself. And so that just raises that question to me of, like, okay, your salvation for you, for what? That seems just like such a limited view. And I do think that's right, that we need to challenge and think of it as, what is it that we all collectively are gaining, that our liberations are connected. And Christian, your point earlier about sitting in the discomfort made me think that I think that's what it is going to be in community always, is about always embracing, being able to sit and work through discomfort and hold tension always, and work through, and that what we have taken as peace in this country is to not do that, to avoid, like you said, for Black folks and other folks of color and immigrants, to just hold in the suffering and the pain and not heal that, and to just carry that around for generations, while, just kind of holding that tension internally, rather than how do we work through that as a community. And that is to be in community. That is beloved community in my mind as well. That how do we get to that place? That it's okay to have differences, to be in discomfort, that we will have enough, that if we truly believe and truly have faith that there is enough and that we're all cared for, then there will be enough of everything.
One of the things I've appreciated while being here in DC, while working for the National Council of Churches and previously with the General Board of Church and Society, is orbiting on the outside of political, of the Capitol, of the political machine that our country is governed by, and seeing that where there's a will, there's a way. And we've seen with previous COVID relief packages, that there is a way to create funds or to create policies that will help companies as opposed to people, and make sure that companies are bailed out, but there's still that lacking of the actual benefits and what is it? stimuli, for financial stimuli for the citizens, right? So where there's a will, there's a way. Like with these policies that we advocate on a daily basis and whatnot, there is possibility, but how do we move people to, and how do we move power to really embracing what's necessary? And that's uplifting the people, helping the people. Noel, Reverend Noel, come on and help somebody.
Yeah, well, and I think that, like you said, you mentioned the corporate interest. Dr. Edwards was hitting on this problem, I think, that we have throughout our congregations on individual salvation. I think that's really wrapped up sometimes for us in mainline congregations. It's a bit veiled, but it's really wrapped up in capitalism, and also what is a sort of theology around prosperity theology, trying that if we are good Christians, then we will be rewarded with the house and the car and every other wish list, the boat, whatever people are interested in, and buying and buying and buying. And then Sara mentioned again this question of what is that doing to our environment, and how can we continue that pattern if we want to keep living on this earth of which we are all part, which is all of our homes, all of our house. And I think there's a lot there that we really have to confront. I think, we see in the gospel, I was assistant pastor at a church on the border, about 45 miles north of the Mexico border in Arizona. And, that what I think about is liminal space and chaos, and how we saw Jesus go to the wilderness, to the mountaintops, in times of trial. And I think that we are in that space of wilderness as a country. I do believe that there is some sort of blessing in knowing in a more forthright way at this point. I mean, I remember growing up, they were saying, racism ended because of Martin Luther King. That's what they were saying in the school books, right? And maybe we've come to a point where we can really confront what is really happening, because it's been so apparent that we can't ignore it. And maybe we can come to those uncomfortable spaces. I think that's a question and a challenge to all of us and to our faith.
I'm really glad that you said that, Noel, because I think that opens up the door for us to have open and honest conversations. I think that we're at a point in our country where more folks are willing to do so, and willing to engage in the difficult work that is anti-racism work, right? So, when it comes to anti-racism work is just as much internal as it is external, because, when we are trying to shift systems, we have to shift the culture, but people are a part of the culture. People make up the culture makes up the environment. So if the people change, then the culture will change. If the culture changes, then the environment will change. So, we have to start with that internal work. And part of that internal work is acknowledging that there is a problem, and acknowledging the root causes and the true essence of what the issue is. I can't stress enough that we have to stop being afraid of seeing ourselves, and we have to stop being afraid of engaging in real, true, tough dialogue, because that's the only way that growth comes. That's the only way that that change comes. But I also think that we have to do some retrospective work, right? As I mentioned at the beginning of this panel discussion, that this house has been built on a faulty foundation. And we can't continue to try to build forward with a bad foundation, because it may look good for a while. However, it will eventually start to crumble and fall. We have to go back and fix the issues that were made wrong when this country was founded, meaning proper reparations for indigenous folks, reparations for Black folks, actually acknowledging that this country was founded upon division and the suffering of the quote unquote other. And I want to kind of echo what has been said on this call so far, is that, you know, our country is in a theological crisis. And I would argue that we have been in a theological crisis since this country was founded, because, you know, we have people who have made God in their image and in their likeness. There are folks who believe that God is this superior white man who is waving his hand around like a wizard and granting wishes. And we should conform to who this superior white man is. But our anti-racism work, our anti-racism call is to combat that ideology, combat that understanding, and really challenge those beliefs and those theologies and speak truth to power.
Christian, you're preaching. You're preaching to me, and I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Because with that, I mean, we know anyone who's had a house, anyone who has seen the bills from foundation repair work, it ain't pretty and it ain't cheap either. The process is not pretty, and the bill ain't nothing to laugh at, because it is pretty expensive work. But it must be done in order to save the house, right? Unless you're going to tear the whole house down and build it. And, you know, that Dr. Edwards, come and talk to us about, you know, since we're resurrection Christians, since we're resurrection people.
Yeah.
Come on and talk to us about resurrecting a bad situation.
I think part of what's happening for me is, well, I mean, and I wrote this book, Mike from the Margins, partly because I was getting a sense that we frame the problem in terms of, how do I get these powerful people to stop acting the way they're acting? And we still some way wind up centering the very people who shouldn't be centered, right? So even in our analysis of the problem, we keep saying, you know, the Trumpsters and those folks, and it's true. I mean, that's part of it, right? But I'm wondering if just think about the resurrection, right? The first witnesses were women, people with no status, and Jesus shows himself to these women, who then go make testimony to the disciples, to the male disciples. And there's something beautiful in that reversal, that the truth is first revealed to those who are who are in the margins, right? And I think what we are talking about in building this house is that building from the ground up means building without centering the thing that hurt us in the first place. Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not trying to convince any Trumpsters to move a different way. I'm not even trying to convince white supremacists. Now, some people might say, well, Dennis, you're being dismissive of folks. And I'm saying, well, no, there's so many other raw materials to build with. And when we can build a new house, then those who have ears to hear and eyes to see can come to that house. So that's the way my mindset has been recently, building the house with new raw materials.
Thank you for breaking that up. I'm grateful for your witness, because out of all the theological study that I've done, I've never seen a blind woman. So Sara, come on and talk to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right, Krista. I was thinking about what you were asking about, you know, how do we then engage with those in power at this time and bring all of this that we're talking about forward to make, I think of it like to make some tangible change, right? And I think there is the individual work that is very important, and community building is part of that. But I think it's exactly what Dr. Edwards said, which is embracing the power we already have in our communities that already embrace and live a liberation theology, and in communities of color, whatever faith traditions, that have demonstrated that power very recently, you know, I think in this year, in very, to me, inspiring and almost miraculous ways, but not, because this is work that has been building for many years. And I think owning and living into that power, and even within immigrant communities, even if folks can't vote, there's power that we all have at bringing together as a community, and that's where we start bringing that change, and not backing down. I think, as Noel was saying, you know, keeping in mind, I'm hopeful, but I'm also realistic, and know we're going to be in a challenging political environment. The Trump folks, as much as I want to not pay attention to them, they're not going away. And the far right, the Proud Boys, you know, they're going to be very loud And I think back to the 90s. I grew up in Idaho, in a predominantly white community, but also at a time when Rush Limbaugh was on TV every night with his radio program, the militias, you know, all of the organizing and that was done at that time that was violent. And that was before the internet, right? And I worry that some of that will come back when Biden's in power and folks feel even more, you know, may escalate from the sort of militant white supremacist areas. And I do think there's important work we have to do in communities to build resilience, come together. And at the same time, we can't back down from what we have been bringing forward, this truth and this very honest peeling back and saying, let's rebuild this foundation so those are some things that I've been thinking about, the tension that I think we'll be living in next year of, you know, there's going to be pressure, I think, especially on people of faith and faith leaders who are seen as many times as moderating forces to support whatever the Biden administration is doing or whatever Congress is doing. And I think we have to stay true to what is it we need to call them to and live our power into and not be afraid and not worry about scarcity and not worry about the potential threats, because all of those are intended to make us fearful and to back down.
Yeah, I'm grateful that Dr. Edwards and you, Sara, actually brought up that, you know, as Dr. Edwards says, there's enough raw material out there. There's enough people out there who are looking for a way to lean into who they are and what we're being called to in this hour. You know, Jesus said that we will always have the poor with us, and all throughout the Christian narrative, we know that there are instigators or propagators of the Roman Empire that will be with us. But what about the people that are least, last, and left out? You know, those are the persons who have been in the streets advocating for justice and saying that Black Lives Matter. Those are the ones that have been undergirding this movement, this Pentecost movement, as I've seen it, because it did not, it wasn't lost on me that the first Black Lives Matter protest last year happened during Pentecost. You know, they've been the ones that have been undergirding this social change that we've seen. And time again throughout historical record, we've seen the least, last, and left out in the streets, feeding the homeless, feeding protesters, being the instigators of social change. And so, like, with that, you know, in MLK's book, starting on page 195, we see that we have ancient habits to deal with. Yeah, we've got a lot of bad habits, right? So in this era that we've seen, you know, there's been a lot of calls to correct the bad habits, right? Both in the church and outside of the church, both in, you know, policy, the way policy is being crafted by leaning into an anti-racist lens when analyzing and when crafting policy, right? Christian Brooks and I work on the racial equity subgroup of the Domestic Human Needs Working Group of WISC. You know, there's some good work that's happening there. We just need more people to catch on and to be a part of this work. So I'm grateful for y'all's witness, but how do we build a better, more inclusive, equitable house with those persons who are looking for, how do we go and get those people? How do we go and catch those folks and call those people into the work? Anyone?
Well, I think that's the challenge. and I think there's nothing easy about it. I mean, one thing we've learned a lot in the sanctuary movement is, you know, this is when we're bringing people in who are undocumented, facing deportation orders. And, you know, it really is a prophetic statement for a congregation to say, we're gonna stand between the government, immigration enforcement, and make sure this family stays united with their kids, with their loved ones, and not allow ICE to come in. That I think has been a powerful statement, and it is a confrontation against these unjust laws. But not everybody in the church is usually okay with that at first. And a lot of times a congregation is very hesitant to vote to become a sanctuary congregation, because they're saying, oh, are we breaking a law? You know, and there's a lot of it's kind of a legal gray area. And what we find is that when a story, when actual family is in that moment of crisis, in that moment of facing deportation within several days or a week or two, then people start changing their mind quite quickly. And they hear the story, they meet the family. And then even though there's maybe a portion of the church that still is not okay with this decision, then when they actually meet the family, when the family comes into the church, then there's a transformation. And I think that it is a long process of transformation, and and it keeps going too. It's ongoing. One of the problems we have is paternalism in the sanctuary movement, which is also based in the white supremacist history. And so really, how do we follow those who are impacted? And how do we find Christ in the voice of the margins? I mean, when I think of the road of Emmaus, remember that they didn't recognize that it was actually Christ until what? Until they brought him in to their house and they broke bread and ate together. And then they recognized Jesus, and then they saw the scars on his hands and his feet. And so I think, again, there's a lot of work we have to do to call people in. And none of it is easy, and we certainly have to confront the sins that not only are of our past but continue today. And I think a lot of us in our faith communities are saying, maybe we don't know, how do we support BLM? And I think that but then going and to the march, going to ask, well, how can I be in solidarity, is an important step that many don't take. And I think going back and saying, how is it that we are called to this moment? As Sara spoke, we have to speak truth to power, even with Biden. Like, this is not the answer to all of our problems. This administration is definitely going to need to be pushed towards justice. I think the big difference is there may be actually an ear to listen on these issues versus the previous administration.
Yeah, chaos does have the tendency to change us if we allow it, right? And that's what we're calling, since we're in the midst of all this chaos, we're calling on others to be transformed, by renewing their minds and understanding the issues and digging deep into themselves to live out who we all are called to be as thriving members of community, right? So, any other thoughts or any calls to action here? Any shameless plugs for your own organizations?
Well, I'm not representing an organization, but I just wanted to piggyback on something Reverend Noel said, because it really spoke to me when you were talking about the actual families, right, that are impacted. It made me think that in my lifetime, I've watched Christians shift from this, kind of maybe intense connection to Israel. Whatever Israel does, it's okay. Although you still see that, of course, in some forms of evangelicalism and fundamentalism. But there's a lot more Christians who are understanding the plight of Palestinians. And I see that happening a lot in the mainline church. But it took stories. It took us to see those families. It took us to see what was actually happening on the ground. And so I just want to say amen to what you just said. I think that the more we bring the reality of the stories of folks impacted by policies and bad theology, it helps to open the eyes like those folks on the Emmaus Road. So thank you.
I really want to lift up something that Dr. Dennis said, and I really agree with it. We have to de-center white supremacy. We have to create spaces where we are de-centering white supremacy. But also, in what I hear Reverend Noel saying and what Dr. Dennis is saying, is we have to create spaces where we are humanizing people. I want to feel like a human being, regardless of the color of my skin. I am done trying to get white folks to see me as a human being. If we really want to do this work, we really want to be effective at this work, and we want to draw people in, we have to create spaces where we are treating people like they are human beings, where we are acknowledging their suffering, we are acknowledging their pain, we are experiencing joy with them, we are acknowledging every aspect or every facet of their being that is as human as ours. And in doing that, that in essence will decenter whiteness, because whiteness and white supremacy is about dehumanization. And that has to go. That has to go. We have to get to a point where we are able to come together with people as people, not as us being superior to them, not as us being their savior or whatever have you, but we are truly in community and we are truly unified.
Oh, do I long for the day that we are all on the same accord, not assimilated, you know, but coming from diverse backgrounds and having all things in common, right? If one is in need, the other folks got their back. If one person feels about, then the others go get them, right? You know, thank you for your witness, Christian. I do want to acknowledge the comments that are in the Zoom chat. Someone from Faithful Democracy said that when suffering from entrenched bad habits, hitting rock bottom or reaching that point of crisis is what often takes to pull out, is often what it takes to pull out. God willing, we've reached that point and we see the hearts begin to pull out of this quagmire. Classic recovery theory applies on a macro level too. And then also Brooke Suter has stated that during this quarantine, we've had a lot of time to reflect on who we are. And this is one of the positive results of having these creative conversations and calling on others to be a part of this work that we're doing and whatnot. So in these final moments that we're here, can you all talk to some of the initiatives that are going on in order to call more people into this work of liberation and equity?
Sure, I can jump in on that. So faith and this I think ties to what I was thinking even in, about how we draw more people in. And there is this challenge right now, I think of, you know, we all have different roles to play and different, you know, that within white communities, white Christian communities, I think it is incumbent on white Christian leaders and lay people to be talking within their own communities about these questions that we're bringing forward, and not to be always, you know, to be sharing stories and humanizing of people of color, but not to be placing the burden of the work of bringing white folks along on people of color, which has been sort of very frequently what happens. And so how to do that, of say, that's your role, but also decenter white faith leaders as at the same time, to say, you have a role to play, it is important, here's what it is that we need you to do as allies in this time, and to be building power and spreading the theology of liberation and equity. And what it looks like is that you also don't take up space like you used to maybe in the past. And that we're going to be holding each other, you know, how do we all hold to that? And the same, I would say, you know, I embrace that work in my own family and community, in the Latinx community, of confronting anti-Blackness, and having uncomfortable conversations with family members and not allowing things to slide, right? It's like that's one of the ways I think of it. It's like we all have a role to play in our individual lives and in this work. So one of the things that Faith in Public Life has been doing through this year is in our trainings, naming that. So we did a video earlier this year that we'd be happy to circulate again about how to be an ally in this time for white faith leaders and people of faith, to be an ally to Black Lives Matter movement, as both white and even Latinx non-Black people of color. We've been doing trainings too on how we can all be part of de-escalating violence in our communities and building resilience. We'll be offering more of those in the coming weeks. Just as we know that that's long-term work, that for that to be effective takes all of us doing that work and building relationships on the ground that are authentic across difference, across faith tradition, across racial differences. And that's not something that we will change overnight, but that it is important work to do to make our community stronger and de-escalate the potential for harm coming to folks. So those are some things we have in the short term, along with some exciting policy agenda work for 2021 that we'll be rolling out, and folks can get involved with by going to our website, faithandpubliclife.org.
Christian, I'll just talk about the racial equity task force that both you and I are a part of. So the Washington Interfaith Staff Community Domestic Human Needs Working Group has a racial equity task force. And our goal is to really see federal policy be written in a racially equitable way. Because right now, the way that policies are written, they don't take into consideration past racial atrocities. It don't take into consideration historical trauma. It doesn't take into consideration racism. And that does not do anything to lessen the inequities that are going on right now within the within our country. So example of that would be, let's see, during the pandemic, we had the Paycheck Protection Program, right? So within the Paycheck Protection Program, there was a pot of money set aside for minority businesses. However, it was not taken into consideration that there were structures put in place to keep Black and brown folks from accessing capital. And because there were no policies to combat that racism, Black and brown folks were not able to access that capital as much as their white counterparts. So our goal in our policy advocacy and writing policy, things of that sort, is to make sure things like that are taken into consideration. The systemic racism that is in place, we need to put policies in place that are combating that systemic racism, dismantling that systemic racism. So one, people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color are able to get the resources that they need, but two, we are able to have equitable results, right? So this uneven playing field does not continue to exist, but we are really able to have folks get the resources that they need to have as equal results as their counterparts.
Amen. Thank you for bringing that up. And I'm grateful that you brought that up because of the fact that, someone commented in the Zoom chat that, reparations aren't needed. And I dare push back on that. And I'm saying that reparations doesn't only come in the form of a check, right? So there are policies that have to be enacted in order to reverse the systemic and historical issues or fallout from decades of racism and slavery, right? There have to be some equitable repayment for the blood, sweat, and tears that were paid, that were committed over the years of this country's establishment. So, enacting better policies and correcting new policies and correcting new policies, that has to be something that's done expeditiously but intentionally. And Christian, I'm grateful to be in the trenches with you on that. So Dr. Dennis and Noel, y'all want to chime in on some things, or Sara, did you want to?
Oh, I'll just say real quickly that at my place now as a professor, I'm getting to teach, and I'm getting to write, and I'm getting to encourage young folks like you all. So while I'm not promoting an organization, what I will say is that I want to encourage those who have the privilege of being able to teach, is to be able to do it in a full-orbed, more holistic way, and to keep it fanning the flames of you activists. So I just wanted to encourage you all that way.
Thank you for it. Thank you for it. Definitely. I mean, some of my best cheerleaders and advocates of personal being have been my professors. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, a big one was already mentioned, the inclusivity and COVID relief funds coming forward is going to be really important, including to also include immigrant leaders, immigrant communities. And right now they've made it so undocumented people can't get any of those benefits in the last CARES Act. And so a lot of cities and states have actually stepped up to create funds for that. I mean, there's a whole list of too much time to talk about in general, and on immigration, we got to push back against everything Trump has done on immigration and try to reverse as much as possible. We want to see that, we are glad to see that Biden has put forward a raise in the refugee annual ceiling. That is really important for us. 120,000 had been cut down to like 8,000 basically. And we're a refugee resettlement organization. We're seeing, that a lot of the refugees are in fact coming from communities of color, many African refugees. Also the diversity visa they were trying to slash, that's really important. Defending our family immigration system, which disproportionately is linked to Asia, Latin America, Africa. The Trump administration was trying to slash that altogether. But again, there's been controversy around this defund the police, and there may be something more to, I'm sure we could have a whole debate about this, but I think in general, when we look at what we're talking about, we all agree that we need to have less militarization and less police of a police state, and invest instead, divest in the militarization and invest in our communities. That is, I think, simple for all of us who are people of faith. We should agree with that. And the same thing goes on immigration. We're part of a defund hate coalition, which was all about trying to defund the additions to detention. So how do we continue to decriminalize people and instead create the policies, and I don't care if you call it reparations or not, but create the policies for people to be able to uplift themselves instead of continuing to hold them down. I mean, this for those of us who are reading the same gospel should seem like common sense, but unfortunately, because of the way in which the politics and the theology has been co-opted, our Christianity has been co-opted, it so often is not represented that way. But I do think that as long as we are thinking about building an inclusive society, we have to fund those inclusion policies, and we need to defund all of the destructive ones. And I think that there's a lot of work ahead for us to actually be able to do that.
Thank you for that, and just want to point out that reparations is a biblical principle. It's seen in 2 Kings and in other places as well. So I can't remember the exact references, but I'm sure Google will help us. So I want to be a respecter of you all's time, and I really thank you from the bottom of my heart for being able to have these courageous conversations in public view. And for those who are watching with us, we thank you for joining us. Please note that there will be a rebroadcast of this conversation tonight at 7 o'clock Eastern Time on National Council of Churches Facebook, as well as YouTube pages. And I strongly encourage you to go ahead and check out these remarkable panelist organizations. North Park Theological Seminary, that's northpark.edu. We have the PCUSA.org, the Presbyterian Church of the USA, Office of Public Witness. They're doing some amazing work, and please do follow Christian Brooks because she's going somewhere. She's going to lead us somewhere. Sara Benitez with Faith in Public Life. A lot of the work that we've done here in DC has not been able to be lifted up without Faith in Public Life's work, so Work and Witness. So we thank Sara and her organization for leading us, and Noel Anderson in the UCC. The UCC is doing some amazing revolutionary work, even though we still have work to do. They are a leader in the front runner in this thing called Justice Advocacy, and also with Church World Service, Church CWS Global. .org. So please do check out these organizations, link up, follow these people on their social media, Twitter and Facebook, wherever they are located, wherever you can find them. And please don't forget about the National Council of Churches. I saw that our COO did mention our Christian Unity Gathering that was held earlier this year, which focused on the issue of reparations and some other justice-minded issues. So the resources are there. Let's get in the fight, and God bless you. Thank you for joining us for today's Faith and Fire Courageous Conversation, part of our Chaos or Community Conversation series. If you would, come back and join us on Wednesday, December 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time to hear from none other than Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, Dean of United Theological Seminary at Columbia University, and Reverend Stacy Cole Wilson, Executive Minister of Justice and Service for the Baltimore-Washington Conference of the United Methodist Church. So please do go to National Council of Churches website at nationalcouncilofchurches.us, find the Faith and Fire Conversations tab, register for the conversation, and we'll see you then. Be blessed, y'all.